This time on Poll Hub, how do I look?
Always fab, Jay.
You look wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, I'm not sure I believe that one, but turns out the age-old human focus on looks has taken some very modern twists, and we're exploring them today. Then healthcare was an issue that dominated U.S. politics for a couple of generations, but post-2016, not so much. Yet it is still a major personal issue for many Americans and has a strong influence on which jobs some people take. There's some interesting data about that. And finally, can you whistle? That's the fun fact. I didn't really think that was an issue or something that people asked about. But apparently some people can't whistle. We're going to find out who they are in the fun fact. Stick around. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Full Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
Mary Griffith.
And I'm Lee Berengoff.
Looksmaxxing. Before today's segment, how many of you knew what that was?
I did.
Not me. Not me.
I reviewed the segment that the students put together, so that's why I knew what it was. That's cheating.
Well, it's an online and social media trend. Simply put, it's a trend to maximize physical appearance, and the target audience actually is adolescent and teenage boys. Now, while the explanation is somewhat simple, the technique and the impact aren't. Yes, some of the focuses are things like grooming and health and diet, but it can escalate to things like supplements or steroids, cosmetics procedures or surgery, or even taking a hammer or a trophy to one's face to help improve someone's bone structure.
Ow. Can I just say ow right there? Is that okay? I mean, wow, that's a lot.
One's personal and this hyper-focus on looks is not new. But what is the trend all about, and what is the impact that it's having on America's youth?
Well, this involves a lot of things, and obviously looks has been, throughout human history, starting with the earliest cave paintings. I'm sure that people are going, wait a second, I don't quite look like that when I'm spearing this beast. Not new. What seems to be new here, and driven at least partly by, I'm going to guess social media because it's so easy to do, is one that traditionally, at least in our modern culture, women have spent more time, or thinking about looks. For instance, there's research from Pew in 2025, teen girls feel more pressure to look good than teen boys. 55% of teen girls say they have pressure to look good, 39% of teen boys. Pressure to fit in socially, 45% of teen girls feel that, 37% of teen boys, not as big a difference. Teen boys, though, do experience greater pressure in some other areas. For instance, they feel pressure to be physically strong, 43% compared to 23%. But this Looksmaxxing thing is very different because it does seem to engage, as you mentioned, mainly young men. And when you said using, a hammer to bone smash, that's literally young men breaking their bones so that they will heal or they will get cosmetic surgery to look better. And a lot of this comes out of the incel movement, which is involuntary celibacy, which has been a movement that's been around for quite some time, mainly driven by social media. And it all seems to come together in this I think those of us who are of a certain generation, really weird combination of the pressure to look, or the feeling like the pressure to look good, with this problem with boys thing that we've talked about before and that society is talking about, is that young men having a lot of mental health issues and a lot of other issues. And it does seem to be perfectly encapsulated in this to me, very strange, trend that has taken over.
What I do want to bring one number in here that according to a Looksmaxxing community survey in 2025, slightly more than 55% who were surveyed said Looksmaxxing has caused them stress, anxiety, or mental health concerns. And I think that can go both ways. One in terms of, the pressure to look a certain way, but also the impact that this is having on those who are participating in Looksmaxxing. But Barb, I know you want to jump in.
Adolescence is not an easy time, and it never really has been. And I think to point to teenagers and young men in their early 20s and to say this has become a significant issue, boys and men kind of catching up to, girls and women, have been experiencing. I don't think it's surprising given the social media culture and what I think is very different for these generations is that every part of their lives is being photographed. For those of us older and those of us much older, you had a respite. You did other activities. You were with other people than your peers where, how you dressed and what you looked like was not as important. But this is a 24/7 need to look your best, which I think is a lot of pressure for anyone, and especially adolescents who are defining who they are and who they want to be and who they think think they should be. I always find it interesting that we think about, clothes and makeup and hairstyles as, very much an individual expression of who we are. But then if you look at a group of people from a particular generation, there's nothing really very individual about it. They're all wearing very similar clothes and styles and haircuts and makeup. And so there, I think, has always been that pressure, but certainly the pressure of social media. And another factor, which is I found very interesting, it was a survey done on, what youth want to be in their careers. And, one of the biggest jobs that youth look to is being an influencer on social media. They see this as a path to greater success, greater income, and more prestige. So factoring all of those things in together, it's not surprising. It's concerning, but not surprising.
Well, I think also, Jay mentioned earlier that this is not a new phenomenon, and this is not one that's isolated to the younger generation. So according to Gallup in 2025, thinking about losing weight, 52% of Americans said that they would like to lose weight. 37% want to remain at their current weight, and 10% wanted to gain weight, actually. And 41% describe themselves as very or somewhat overweight. Numbers by the CDC between 2021 and 2023, slightly more than 40% of Americans were obese. And another 31% were classified as overweight and not obese. And new data from Gallup shows that 15% of Americans have taken a GLP-1 at some point, and 91% are aware of these drugs. But it's not just a focus on weight or obesity. There's a huge anti-aging economy. According to Pew 2025, 27% of Americans color their hair to cover grays. 21% have taken anti-aging supplements. And 5% have had non-surgical cosmetic treatments like Botox to get rid of those pesky little wrinkles. And 3% have gotten cosmetic plastic surgery. So, Lee, opening this up to you, how much of this is an inheritance of the younger generation from the cultural norms that have been predetermined?
I was wondering when you were talking about youth and all these things, how you were going to bring me into the discussion. And so you did very well, because when you started talking
stop it, Lee.
When you started talking about obesity, GLP-1 drugs, coloring hair, losing weight, I haven't done cosmetic surgery, but I check a lot of these boxes, I will admit.
Would you wait, would you have preferred that I ask Barb or Jay to continue speaking and not bring you into the conversation?
No, I have to be in the conversation, even if I edit everybody out. But you know me. I was going to say a couple things. First of all, we've all been on the person side of a TV camera at various points in our life. And that does make you a little bit more conscious of appearance, because you're now being seen not by just the people you're interacting with directly, but that TV is, in old days, used to go to millions and billions of households. Maybe not as much now. But I think when we get into this topic, I do think the issue of obesity and health becomes an important consideration. The fast foods, which people start inhaling at a young age, become their fat later. And I think that becomes a concern. But the drugs that are out now for the, GLP-1s and all those variety of pills, the doctors don't know exactly why they're working so well, but they are helping people with all kinds of metabolic and cardio issues, not just the weight, but also related to the weight as a sort of a side benefit of all this. So yeah, it's interesting. The other thing I was thinking about is we haven't said the word anorexia on this. And that was sort of like a major thing with youth and people's appearance, and how that became really very dangerous for lots of people. So a little bit of appearance, sure, that's good. Worrying about it to a fault can bring a lot of harm and danger in people's lives.
Well, I think, you point out, Lee, and for our generation, certainly, television was a big deal. You wanted to maximize your appearance in order to have those interviews and be a spokesperson, an expert. And there's this concept of what those people should look like. But I think for this generation, especially the fact that they do have so many factors that cause them anxiety, from school shooting, expectations in academics, expectations from peers, all of the activities that they participate in beyond school, I think it's important to recognize that all of these factors are, having a very significant impact on young people. And certainly we point to young men. There was, another survey by Pew, which really talked about the impact of social media among teens. And 20% of girls say it hurts their confidence. 10% of boys. 25% of girls say it hurts their mental health. 14% teen boys. And social media makes them feel worse about their own lives. Teen girls, 34%, teen boys, 20%. And I think, we first experienced that with TV and the perfect families that we saw on those sitcoms, that never had any problems. And if they did have a problem, it was resolved in the 25 minutes assigned to the episode. So I think social media actually puts those things on steroids, and certainly something that we should all be aware of as adults, especially those of us who teach and who are working and connecting with young people on a regular basis.
It's also important, I think, to recognize, to Lee's point, that there's a difference between focusing on your weight for health reasons, because obesity is a major health issue. It's not just about appearance. But social media has amplified the normal adolescent experiences that I was going to say students, that young people face on a daily basis. There's always been teasing. There's unfortunately always been bullying. But from a parent's perspective, you hear stories of children who are being bullied online, and just how far that goes beyond a normal conversation, or a note being passed in a classroom in the good old days. And so I think it's really the focus here should be on what social media is doing on the mental health and the long-lasting impacts that young people today may face if this isn't monitored, if it isn't handled in a serious way.
So for those of us who've been around for a while, we may remember that healthcare was pretty much the dominant issue, or one of the dominant issues in American, especially presidential politics, for, 10 elections in a row. Famously in 1992 with Bill Clinton, and then he put Hillary in charge of Hillary Care, right? Didn't work out so well. And then the very dramatic moments when Obamacare passed, with John McCain from the well of the Senate casting the tie-breaking vote to make Obamacare the reality. And since then, although it was an issue in 2016 when Donald Trump ran against it and saying that he would come back with the perfect, beautiful plan that would care for everybody and cost nothing, nothing's happened, right? Nothing's really changed on that. There have been some funding issues in different ways that has affected people's access to Obamacare. But healthcare as an issue post-2016, in poll after poll, slid beneath almost every other issue, save the economy, which has climbed and has been the major issue really since 2018, according to some polling from Gallup. But healthcare is still a really big deal for Americans in maybe some slightly different ways. And one of which is jobs, because in America, unlike most of the rest of the world, many Americans, their health insurance is tied to their job. That's the case for all of us. Our healthcare is provided as part of our job at Marist University, and I will say it's an excellent health insurance plan. Thank you for that. But according to Gallup, a Gallup West Health poll from this month, July of 2026, health insurance is keeping more Americans in jobs that they don't want. 24% of workers say they have stayed in a job they wanted to leave because they didn't want to lose their employer-sponsored health insurance. That is up from 16% in 2021. And remember, in 2021, Obamacare has been around this entire time. So the idea would be that you wouldn't have to depend on that. Yet that number has increased from 16% to 24%. 48% of workers who are highly stressed about healthcare costs say they have stayed in their jobs for insurance. Makes sense. 29% of workers with chronic health conditions report job lock, as it's called, which means they don't want to leave their jobs because of that, compared to 17% of those that do not have a chronic condition. And benefits drive a bunch of decisions. In another poll, this is an Oscar Health. Oscar is a health insurance company. They did this poll with Tucker Research, and it's December of 2025. 53% said health insurance is the biggest, at that time, is the biggest factor in their next career move. Which, think about that. That's crazy. It's not like, I want to learn new skills. I want to make more money. Healthcare, 53%. 52% would choose a job with better health benefits over one they're more interested in. 43% have delayed starting their own business because they're concerned about losing healthcare coverage. And 57% say they would make a career change if affordable health insurance were guaranteed. Barb, you've been around for this entire time that I'm talking about when health insurance has been a huge issue. It's interesting that it's not listed in the issues when we poll people highly compared to the economy anymore. Yet this data, it's just so striking to me. It is having this huge impact on one of the major parts of people's lives.
Absolutely. And there's no question that the issues that people have had financially, especially with inflation over the last few years and just the overall cost of living, anybody who goes to a grocery store knows that you need to take a deep breath and brace yourself, every time you walk in, because the prices seem to change right in front of our eyes. But healthcare, although, distant, is still a very important issue for Americans. And it's one where, although Obamacare, I think, did have a lot of things in place to support the program, especially initially, understand that as the years have passed, more and more of the responsibilities for Obamacare have fallen to the states as well. So depending upon where you live, you have very different access to the different healthcare markets. That said, we also have seen an exponential growth in the costs of healthcare and a diminishing of the access to good healthcare. So as costs have risen, as government support has diminished, and access has also diminished, particularly in rural areas and, kind of ex-urban areas, this is becoming a very significant issue that is central to many families. So not surprising that it would have an impact on the choice of jobs that people make, as well as the choice of, where they live and the communities that they live in and the healthcare access that is available to them.
Lee, considering how much, you remember the battles, right? This was a defining issue in American politics for so long. And does it surprise you that it's still there, but we don't hear about it? When Americans are asked if it's their number one issue, it's not. It's the economy by a big margin. When Americans are asked, is it really important and are you concerned? The huge majority still say yes. So is this a distinction without a difference that we're making here?
Yeah, I think it's a big deal for a lot of people. A big deal was, I believe, the phrase Joe Biden used when Obamacare was passed. So that's not exactly how he put it, but it was a big deal. I want to go back to that time for a second and then try to circle back to your question. One of the things we saw in our poll data way back when Obamacare was being considered was the notion of a public option. And that meant that the government would just do this, not done directly through the insurance agencies. And the public support for that option was enormous. Obama, to, I think, his detriment, kind of gave up that argument without a fight. You might want to lead with that so that you get a better deal, even if you don't get all you want on the public option. But public sentiment was there for him to go a little bit further than sort of concede that point in what was a very messy discussion. I know there are some of those gatherings of medical people, and by the time, I think the network covered one of those live, by the time they got done, people weren't sure what Obamacare was. I mean, it was very hard to explain, and that made a problem for a lot of people. Fast forward to the current, as Barb said, there's been a lot of chipping away at what people have access to and the costs and the confidence. And I think, the economy does loom over all this. And I think that may be why, when people go for jobs, they are concerned about what the healthcare benefits are, particularly young people who know that they're likely to have different careers in the next 5 and 10 years, which means they're going to be switching jobs, which means healthcare becomes important in whether you can transfer it to wherever your new job is. So it is tied to the employment economic picture in a big way. And I think it hasn't gone away. And if anything, it's probably even more so, given that people aren't really trusting insurance companies, the medical profession. I mean, it's a lack of trust and then insecurity that people have about their futures that make it very important for people still. But that's right. It may not show up as big as the economy does, but it's a real big deal for a lot of people.
There's a January poll from earlier this January, I should say, from KFF, Kaiser Family Foundation health tracking poll. The ACA, the Affordable Care Act, is popular. 58% of Americans have a favorable view, 41% have an unfavorable view. It has been positive, net positive, since 2017. So the ACA is still has lots of support, and it has kind of become, there's not as much of the Republican kind of saying, oh, we're going to get rid of it and replace it with something. That's kind of disappeared. I think it has become something that is now part of American life. But Mary, I'm wondering, when you think about a family and health insurance and kids, in my case, my husband's covered under our insurance, it's not you. It's not just you you're thinking about when you're thinking about your job. So when these answers like, I would get health insurance over a job I'm more interested in, they're not necessarily just thinking about them, right?
No, they're not just thinking about themselves. And none of these numbers honestly surprise me. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from single friends of mine, well, at least you have 2 health plans that you could use if you needed to. Your husband has health insurance. When I was looking for a pediatrician, when, my eldest was born, I wanted to make sure that the pediatrician accepted both health plans. Even going through, having our 3rd child, it was, is the hospital going to accept both health insurance plans? What's covered under one? And, if there is an ancillary cost that needs to be covered, all these things went through my head. So it is not just about myself, although that is important too, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your family or your spouse. So it is widespread. A friend of mine, who is the chief breadwinner in her family said to me, well, I couldn't even think about, making a change because of our current economic situation. So there are lots of things to think about here. And Lee, you mentioned trust, and I think that's a big deal because I wonder if the public option would be as well received in today's political climate, given the lack of trust in our government and in other institutions.
Well, it's also worth noting that public health systems in other countries like the UK are under a huge amount of stress because of the money as well. So it's not just an American issue, but we do have a very particular situation in which private health employer insurance is a part of our health insurance program. And that seems to have a lot of impact on how Americans decide where they're going to work.
All right, fun fact time, and far be it for me to bring up a topic that I can't do, okay? And the question was asked by Gallup in 1947. Apparently, at that time, and perhaps even today, could people whistle? And at that point, 81% of the national audience said yes, they could. The remaining 19% said they couldn't. I myself am in the 19%. Now, you're not watching this. I know you're listening to it, but were I to attempt to whistle, you would not hear much except a little air going out.
Oh, do it.
Neither can I
Let's
play
see.
the flute.
Let's see.
Or,
Come on.
Do you want
it.
to see? Okay.
That's silence. That's
The
silence.
is deafening.
That is Lee whistling.
No, there was something. There was some. Now, Barb, I know you're a professional whistler.
Oh no. I'm not. No. I'm not. And I haven't whistled in a really long time. But yeah, I think, growing up in a rural area, you better whistle because it's a sound that can carry a long distance. And yes, I had lots of critters in the family. So whistling, for those critters, whether they be dogs or horses or even ducks, pay attention to whistles. Yeah, it was very valuable, but something I have not honed in a very, very long time. But I could not do the whistle where, like you hold your lip.
Yeah,
and it's a real loud sound. And I was always so impressed with kids in the neighborhood who could do that.
Mary, any whistling down in Queens?
I don't know what happened. I used to be a really good whistler, and I don't know if my mouth shifted or something. I have no idea. I can't whistle anymore. Really, to save my life. However, there was a mom in the neighborhood who could, put the 2 fingers together and hold the lip and whistle. And boy, could she get our attention when she needed to.
Anyway, Jay.
That was awful. Yeah, no, I can whistle. I can't do the fingers in the mouth thing, though. That's what I always wanted to do. Like Barb, it's like I was so impressed by people who could do that.
Yeah.
But I can't do that. Yeah, I didn't know people couldn't whistle. I literally am surprised. I did not know you couldn't whistle. People couldn't whistle. And I didn't know you couldn't. So I've learned something.
It's not the kind of thing you go up to people in average conversation, cocktail talk. By the way, are you a good whistler? AJ, how about the youth of America? Not to pigeonhole you in any way, but do you hear, whistling in the residences around Marist?
I don't know. I hear in the residences around Marist. I would say for me, it's like 50-50. Sometimes I can do it. Sometimes I can't. So let's see if I can do it now. Are you guys hearing anything?
Well, let us point out for those who are only listening, that was an attempt by AJ. Sounded even worse than mine.
I don't know if it was worth. It
Yeah.
was silent though.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe it was the microphone didn't pick it up. Maybe did
No,
you
I
actually hear a
don't- I don't
sound?
think it was like.
Well, maybe we could have a competition at some point, because there are, unless Mary or Jay, you can top Barb, I think she's going to take the crown right now.
Well, hopefully,
Barb, can you do
everyone
the-
is making an attempt to see what they can do.
I am right now and nothing's happening. Nope. Anyway, all across America, people are trying to whistle right now. And I think we can talk about being an influencer. I think we just turned the page on that. And that wraps up no sooner than necessary this edition of Poll Hub. And we'll catch up with you next week. Have a good week, folks.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week. Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist University in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes AJ Gambino, Tommy Rogers,
Cassie Connors, and Molly Goodger.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, consider telling a friend about us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal accessible from our website.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.